Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're tackling a topic that gets, well, completely misunderstood in our modern culture, and honestly, even within a lot of modern faith communities. We're talking about biblical fasting. But listen, we aren't just going to sit here and look at the dry, dusty history of it all. We're going to explore the massive paradigm shift that happens when we actually understand what this practice was designed to be from the very beginning. Because, spoiler alert, it is absolutely not about just starving yourself or, checking off some religious box. It's something much deeper and honestly a whole lot more profound. To really wrap our heads around the shift, we have to look directly at the actual words of Jesus. When Jesus gave his disciples instructions about fasting, he used very, very specific language. He didn't say, hey, if you fast, he explicitly said, when you fast. Think about the difference there. In our modern context, we kind of just assume fasting is this totally optional, extreme practice that's reserved only for the super spiritual folks, right? But back in the time of Jesus, fasting wasn't some fringe hardcore activity. No way. It was a completely normal, often weekly ritual for everyday people. It was just an absolute given that this was a natural part of the rhythm of a healthy spiritual life. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it completely reframes our physical understanding of what is actually happening here. Fasting is not simply the act of depriving yourself of calories. It is fundamentally a way to pray with your whole body. We're so used to thinking of prayer as something we just do up in our heads or maybe by speaking out loud. But fasting turns your physical biology into an active, breathing participant in your prayer life. We're moving completely away from the idea of a strict diet or some kind of self-punishment and stepping into a sacred space where your entire physical being is fully engaged in seeking God. And that brings us to a quote that literally dismantles one of the biggest, most toxic misconceptions we have. Fasting is not a transactional chore. Let me say that again. You are not enduring hunger so that God somehow owes you a favor, or so you can level up in some imaginary spiritual point system. It wasn't about earning points, it was about making space. It's a deeply, deeply relational practice. You're intentionally clearing out a dependency in your day-to-day life so that you could fill that exact space with something far more meaningful. So this brings us to a highly intentional working definition. Fasting is temporarily restraining your physical appetites in order to connect with God in a posture of surrender. It's a very physical, tangible way of saying, I need God more than I need food right now. When your stomach growls, and it will for sure, it actually serves as a physical alarm clock, a reminder of your deeper spiritual hunger. It reminds us that ultimately only God can satisfy our deepest human longings. It's this beautiful act of yielding your most basic, hardwired drive over to Him. Let's move to and see how this builds into a wider historical context. When we look at the historical precedents in the Bible, fasting wasn't just done at random when someone felt like it. It was fundamentally about recognizing a specific period of time as uniquely sacred. By altering their daily intake and their normal routine, the people were physically declaring that this particular moment, whether it was a specific day or a whole week, was completely set apart from the normal rhythms of life. It was time specifically carved out to focus entirely on the divine. And when we map this out chronologically, we see just how incredibly versatile this practice really was. It totally wasn't a one-size-fits-all thing. Every single year on the Day of Atonement, it was used as a powerful tool for humility and forgiveness. But then, jump to the 11th century BC, and they used it to apologize and realign their hearts. Then there's grief for Saul and Jonathan. Fast forward all the way to the early church in Acts 13, and they're using it for something entirely different again, seeking guidance. Humility, apology, grief, guidance. Fasting was the physical amplifier for all of these different seasons of life. So the crucial point is this. You do not have to fast to connect with God or to hear from God. God is always accessible to us anytime, anywhere. But fasting is this profound, next-level way of fully surrendering your body over to God and trusting that He will actually come and meet you right there in your place of need. You're willingly creating a physical deficit in your life, trusting completely that He is the only one who can truly fill it. Now, let's pivot from ancient biblical history to our English-speaking modern context. We live in a highly distracted, ridiculously fast-paced world that looks, well, very different from the first century. We're constantly bombarded with information, nonstop notifications, and literally endless entertainment. So how on earth do we apply this ancient practice of physical prayer to our modern lives today? How do we possibly make space when every single second of our day is aggressively competing for our attention? Well, the core principle of fasting applies beautifully to restraining our modern appetites too. Today, we can practice this by fasting from modern noises. Think about it. Fasting doesn't just have to be about food. It's about setting aside the constant noise so we can actually hear his voice more clearly. And yeah, this means literally putting down your phone. It means deliberately turning off the screens. It's about setting aside those digital distractions that constantly overfeed our minds, but somehow leave our spirits completely and utterly malnourished. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate goal of the practice. Just look at this contrast here. When we deliberately set aside that digital noise, we aren't just creating some empty void in our day that we have to white knuckle our way through. We are substituting our screen time for deep spiritual focus. We're doing it to literally feast on his presence instead. We are trading the empty, junk food calories of social media and endless doom scrolling for the deep, deeply satisfying nourishment of connecting with the Creator. Which brings us to our final and maybe most important thought. I want you to look directly at this question and really reflect on it for a moment. What can you pause to make room for him? Whether it's actually skipping a meal or maybe just turning off your phone for the entire evening, what is an appetite or a daily habit in your life that you can intentionally restrain right now to create a sacred space? Because, when you finally make the space, you might just be absolutely amazed at how he fills it. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.